We have the unique opportunity today to hear from Roin Foy. If there is any physical mediumship circle that has been referenced more widely, I don't think there is, than the Scole experimental group, because of their groundbreaking work that they did. And Roin and Sandra Foy were the pioneers of that group, along with Diane and Alan Bennett. And Roin is now continuing his effort for physical mediumship by establishing a center in Spain that we're very supportive of. And so Roin has fascinating things to say about physical mediumship. We're really looking forward to his presentation today. So Roin, we'll turn it over to you.
Very much, Craig. Yeah, well, I'm Roin Foy. I'm delighted to meet you all. My involvement with physical mediumship started about 45 years ago, and crazily enough, I never actually went through the normal channels of learning a little bit about mental mediumship. It was straight into physical, and the way that happened was that I was always interested in mediumship as a child. My mother was a natural medium but never really developed it. And every time we sort of passed the local spiritualist church in the bus, I always imagined stuff flying around in there. But as time went on, I got involved about 45 years ago when I spotted an advert in a local paper in Leicester in the UK, which stated anybody interested in psychic research, please contact the box number. And I did that along with probably another dozen people. And the chap there was a fellow called Elmer Brown. I think he was actually originally from America, but he'd moved to the UK, and he'd been running a physical circle for many years. And he'd sort of run short of sitters at that time. So I went along with these other 12 people and sort of had an interview there. And he told us basically about what he was doing. And he was trying to develop physical mediumship along the lines of the people in Dunedin in 1926 in the book called The Blue Room, which described physical mediumship in the light, independent voice in the light. And this is quite amazing. There was a young girl there, Pearl Judd, who was getting independent voice, and her uncle, Clive Chapman, was the chap that wrote the book, but also he was the leader of the circle. And Pearl Judd never actually went into, never sort of went into any different state. There was no deep trance involved there at all. And there was light. They simply sat at the piano. She sat at the piano and played it and sang. And then the spirit voices joined in. And it sounds a really fantastic circle that they had there. Well, the interesting thing about it is that there was no deep trance, there was no cabinet, there was no ectoplasm. And if you study it carefully, it seemed very much to me that it was done in a different way. Well, the circle that I joined in Leicester, after I'd sort of had my interview there and we understood what they were trying to do, I was told, well, if you're interested, please join the circle, which I was happy to do. And I think there were about 5 of us out of the 12 that were asked to join. And then the chap sort of said to us, would you like to see where we sit? And of course, yes, we were all happy about that. Now, his house was a detached house that was standing about 150 yards away from a house either side. It was a long way from the road, and there were just fields behind. And as we sort of went up the stairs to go through to their seance room, everybody there on the stairs heard the sound of a baby crying. Now it's totally independent. We all heard it, and it was in the light. And I mentioned this to Elmer Brown afterwards, and he said, well, maybe it was a message for you. Never really thought anything more about it until I went home. And my first wife and I had actually applied to adopt. And a week later, we got a telephone call saying, well, we've actually got a baby for you. And that was my first experience with independent voice, which was quite fantastic. And my son now, a big strapping lad, about 45 years old, in a police force in Nottingham, in the UK. But that was the start of my involvement with physical mediumship. I knew absolutely nothing about mental mediumship. Learned a little bit later on because made good friends with some of the sitters who were actually circuit mediums, and taught me a lot about mental mediumship. But Elmer Brown was also very good friends with Leslie Flint, and took his circle along to Leslie Flint's about twice or three times a year, every single year. And I'd only been there about a month when Elmer Brown said, well, we're all going to Leslie Flint's. Now, this was quite an adventure for me. I'd sort of never experienced a professional medium before that worked with physical mediumship. But I went to Leslie Flint's on that first occasion, and we had contact with about 15 spirit people who were literally speaking from midair. It was a fantastic experience. And I walked out of that place thinking to myself, well, this is for me. And that was 45 years ago, and I've never stopped being involved in physical mediumship since, one way or another. Sandra and I have had several groups over the years. When we first met, funnily enough, it was in a circle that I'd started in Romford in Essex. And I just happened to be visiting it. I'd started the circle and left it, and I just happened to be visiting on the first occasion that Sandra went along for an interview to join the circle. So that's how we originally met, and then eventually I was asked to go back to the circle. Now, the medium in that circle was a chap called John Squires. He was a natural deep trance medium, a really fantastic medium, who was trying to develop independent voice and other physical phenomena. And shortly after I went back to the circle, when I was asked to do so, we started to get very good phenomena as well as his deep trance. And this ended with independent voice, levitation, various other bits and pieces, working with ectoplasm. And John was working in a cabinet. Well, of course, most of our first circles started on the assumption, as far as we were concerned, that we would be working with ectoplasm. But in fact, Sandra and I never had a cabinet in our different circles. We had about 6 or 7 different circles in between then and the Scole circle that started. We'd never had a cabinet in there, but we did develop some phenomena. Some circles were better than others. Some circles we really didn't get very much at all. But we continued all the way along to try and get phenomena. And then eventually, when we moved to Scole in 1991, we started a circle there a couple of years down the line in 1992, end of 1992. Because by that time in 1990, I'd personally started the Noah's Ark Society, which we started as an organization to actually rescue physical mediumship, because in 1990 there was a good chance that it would actually die out with the older mediums, older physical mediums, who were themselves all passing to spirit. So we sort of started the Noah's Ark Society because at that time I was sitting in a circle in Ilkeston in Derbyshire, and we got independent voice in that circle, where I was actually asked to start an organization to rescue physical mediumship by Noah Zerdin, who came through on that occasion. So that's how the Noah's Ark Society started. I did it on my own, funded it on my own, and very quickly it became quite a good organization. We linked up with 2 physical mediums. The first one I sort of personally discovered because I was sitting in his circle, and that was Colin Fry, down in the south of England on the coast. And what the very first member to join the Noah's Ark Society was a guy who was another physical medium, and Stuart Alexander, which is actually not exactly his right name, but Colin Fry at the time, when he started to demonstrate for us at the Noah's Ark Society, we changed his name basically, and he had a pseudonym which I made up called Lincoln, which was very similar to Colin. And Stuart Alexander was a businessman, and didn't really want his own name to come out as a physical medium. But it was months after he joined the Noah's Ark organization as member number 1 before he actually said to me, well, actually, I am a physical medium. And it was only because of his witnessing the demonstration that Colin Fry did for us at our very first seminar, residential seminar in Leicester, that Stuart Alexander saw for himself, because he's very much deep trance. Stuart saw for himself the effect that Colin's mediumship in that first demonstration was having on everybody who participated. In that first sitting, there were about 100 sitters. I had a very, very successful sitting. And eventually, as I say, Stuart Alexander said, yes, okay, I feel now I've never done anything public, but because this has had such a deep effect on people, it's very, very important, I feel, to go out and demonstrate myself. So Stuart Alexander also started to record, to demonstrate for us at the Noah's Ark Society. And we moved from the place we were originally when the society started, which funnily enough was a Church of England rectory in just outside Norwich, in a little village called Poswick. We moved to a place in Scole, a farmhouse there, because the rectory was needed for another vicar to go in there, and we were asked after 2 years to sort of move on, which we did. And that basically, that street farmhouse in Scole was found by Spirit, who intended us to go there for the special work they wanted us to do in that place. And that was the Scole experimental group. And it just went from strength to strength. We had 2 mediums there, Diana and Alan Bennett, who went into deep trance very, very shortly after the group started. Neither of them had done it particularly a lot in the past, but it just happened naturally. And the phenomena really just got better and better whilst we were there. But the big thing was that it was pointed out to us by our Spirit team, and we worked very, very carefully and closely with that Spirit team, that this was being done in a brand new way. There was no ectoplasm involved, there was no cabinet involved, and we never had sat like that, to be honest. And in Scole, they told us that we were working not with ectoplasm, but in a different way, which had happened before, but had never really been able to be done on a regular basis. So it was only with energy and not with ectoplasm, which actually ruled out quite a lot of the danger for the mediums who work with ectoplasm, which can be very dangerous for a medium working in that way. We were taught basically by the Spirit team, who gave us an awful lot of information on how energy-based mediumship and phenomena worked, in that there are 3 different energies which are collected together by the Spirit team, brought into the circle room where we were sitting, and then combined together. And these 3 energies, first and foremost, is an energy from Spirit, which the Spirit team brought with them. The second one is the energy from the sitters themselves, spiritual energy, not physical energy. And the third one is natural columns of energy which exist in different geographical places in the earth at the moment. And if anybody actually starts sitting for physical using the energy format, then they will themselves attract one of these natural columns of energy, which can then be mixed with the 2 other forms of energy to form a creative energy. And this is generally done in a glass, a glass dome. We were asked, as we developed, by the Spirit team to provide one, and of course we did. The energy was collected in there and then pulled out sort of by the Spirit people who used it to create the phenomena, including we got an awful lot of teleportation, which meant that the Spirit people were literally, rather like Star Trek, were teleported. The spiritual essence of the Spirit people was teleported into the seance room, and they were able to draw the creative energy from the dome that had been created by the spirit team. And by using their mind, and of course they had to practice a lot to get this right, they were able to solidify themselves partially or even completely. And as the phenomena continued with Scole, we had up to 8 spirit people there at any one time, all walking around the room, all interacting with us. They could hug us, they could talk to us. You know, it was just so natural. And I mean, their bodies felt quite normal, quite warm. The clothes they wear were quite normal. I mean, we did a lot of demonstrations later on, just before Scole finished. And one of those actually was we went over to the USA and did several sittings in LA and in San Francisco. And during those sittings, several people were able to sort of feel the energy, well, feel the actual spirit people themselves. And they were allowed to touch back when they were touched, so they could feel that they were wearing quite normal clothes. And there was one lady actually up in just outside LA at Reseda, who came to one of our sittings. And this lady felt a spirit person actually holding her hand. She touched back, and as she sort of put her hand further up the arm of this spirit person, she got as far as the shoulder, and the clothes and the arm and everything just disappeared at that point. Well, this was purely and simply because on that occasion they were only really sort of solidifying an arm and a hand for this particular person. But we had complete spirit people there. And as time went on at Scole, as many of you might have known, we actually did have contact as well with beings from other dimensions, which was quite exciting at the time. There were several means of sort of contacting us, and there were 5 different forms of direct contact between us and the spirit people. The first one of these, and this is the way we were actually getting our instructions and advice from the spirit team, was by the deep trance mediumship of Diana and Alan. And this morphed eventually into what we called the remote voices, where the human larynx of Alan was literally stretched in some way, so the voice appeared to be coming from outside the actual room, or even in the walls on occasions. And then, of course, we got the independent voice. Well, we were encouraged, because we were working with energy, to use different terms from those people who were working with ectoplasm, the more traditional terms, as you might say. And this was exactly what we were doing. We called them energy voices, and they were just as loud and clear as any voices that we'd heard at Leslie Flint's. And I had the privilege of sitting with Leslie about 25 times. And you know, we were able to sort of converse quite literally with these voices. There was one chap there who was an engineer who, in his earth life, and he became very, very good at communicating in this way with the energy voices that sort of came out of the air. Then, of course, we had direct communication through through a cassette tape recorder amplifier. And spirit people were able to talk out of the amplifier, and they told us that the entry point for their work was actually the silicon chip in the tape recorder. And we had several people who were contacted by relatives during seminars when people sat with us, literally with the spirit people speaking through the amplifier of the tape recorder, which had had its microphone removed, and all other things that could actually receive anything other than the information from spirit. And finally, of course, we had a film came through, because we were doing an awful lot of different types of work in Scole. And sort of we had a message from Edison himself, which he put on an unopened 35mm film. And he effected this film, including a blueprint of a little device, which we subsequently called the TDC device, standing for Transdimensional Communication Device. And we were told by the spirit team that not only would we be able to speak direct to the spirit world using this device, but once they'd got it completely right, we would be able to speak to other dimensions with this device. Again, it was plugged into a cassette tape recorder to use the amplifier. And the very first person himself to speak to us through that device was Edison, after several months of the spirit team actually working with it, to experimenting with it to get it completely right. And when we received this message from Edison, he signed it TAE, his initials on the film, and we had 3 scientists from the SPR who were sitting with us on a regular basis, really investigating the Scole phenomena. And these guys contacted the Edison Institute in America and asked for a copy of some sort of document that he might have signed with his initials in his lifetime. The Edison Institute sent back a memo from 1926, which was again signed TAE. And when we compared the 2 signatures, the TAE on the film, which we'd received psychically, and the TAE on the memo that he'd signed in his lifetime, they were virtually identical. So we got an awful lot of very good evidence of the veracity of spirit and the reality of the spirit world through our spirit team and the various different experiments that we conducted there. There was just so much. There's so many different things that happened that basically, I'd sort of never come across quite so much phenomena in one pot, as it were. And the scientists afterwards wrote a report, which they called the Scole report. I think Anne actually has reprinted that, so it's available through Anne, which is more or less in scientific jargon, where they're actually coming down very much in favour of all the phenomena being 100% genuine. We had a wonderful time, and it was just such a disappointment when finally Scole finished totally unexpectedly. And the reason that it did was because our spirit team kept pushing us further and saying, do you mind if we continue to experiment? Well, we were totally open-minded, and we said, well, no, look, you go as far as you can. And eventually we had a problem, which was basically because there was interference with the crystals that we were working with in the seance room. They started to screech. And that, of course, brought both Alan and Diana out of the trance that they were in. Eventually, we lost contact with our spirit team, but we had somebody who we thought might have been some sort of Lord of the Cosmos that explained to us fully via a video recorder and a video link where we were able to see him totally animated and his outline and with his lips moving and everything as he spoke to us and told us why they were going to have to close it down, because every time we sat, there was another group, no evil group or anything, but just a group like ourselves, researchers from our future, but too far into our future. And the spirit team had worked, they built a portal in our room for our use and for their own use, which was designed originally to sort of go about 15 years into our future. Well, in fact, they'd built it slightly too big. And consequently, it was able to contact people, living people in our future who were having a life in our future that was 115 years into the future. And we were told that, unfortunately, this couldn't continue. Basically, it was against the rules of the cosmos, as it were. We were not allowed to talk to them under any circumstances because we might have learned things which could have changed the course of mankind. So that was eventually why the whole thing closed down. And of course, Sandra and I were totally devastated, as were the 2 mediums, There were 4 of us in that group, and we got our best. We started off with 7 in the Scole experimental group, and natural wastage basically took us down to 4 people. We got our best work with the 4 people there, and you know, we've always considered since then that a smaller group, when you're developing phenomena, is better than a larger group. And ever since Scole finished, it's nearly 20 years ago now. The end of this year, it'll be 20 years. And in the interim, Sandra and I have sat with different people. The 2 mediums at Scole decided they weren't going to continue with the work at all. But Sandra and I, in the interim years, have sat with many different people, different circles, never really achieved too much at all since Scole, until we finally met the 2 sitters that we now have at the end of last year. And we once again have a group of 4 with 4 sitters who blend perfectly in harmony. And since the beginning of this year, we have been developing some excellent phenomena. We're now the Torcal experimental group. And already, really since the start of the year, we've been getting quite spectacular spirit lights. We're very, very close to having the independent voice again. And we're getting the first signs of teleportation of spirit personalities in the room. So it's going along very nicely, but the phenomena is developing at a really, really rapid rate. And the reason for that, so we're told by our spirit team now, is that they are preparing us for the work which we shall be doing, demonstrating in the new centre that we're hoping to build, or not to build, but to actually buy and renovate in Antequera in Andalusia in Spain. So a sitting I had with a medium called Sandy Ingham in June last year started the whole process when she connected us up with our spirit team of the past and explained to us that we needed to buy this property. We got some very, very good evidence from that. But prior to that, 10 years prior to that, when we first moved to Spain, we had a group, 2 physical mediums from Glasgow came to stay with us. And during the sessions that we had with them, which were quite wonderful, and they were also working with energy, had very, very good phenomena, including independent voice. We were told at that point that we had to have this centre, and I was actually given 25 clues as to where it could be. The only thing that helped us at the start was that the name of the town began with an A, but all of those 25 clues I researched on the internet, and there's only one place in the whole of Spain where that could have been, and that's Antequera in Andalusia. So very, very shortly after those sittings, we met this couple actually, that we had 3 sittings with them here in our home. And then we met them again in France and we shared a gîte and we had 2 more sittings. And out of that came an awful lot of information about what will be happening at this centre. And shortly after that, just a couple of months after that, Sandra and I had never been to Andalusia. We're actually living on the Costa Blanca here. And we went down to Antequera. Well, the very first day, well, I should say that before we actually went to Antequera, Sandra had a sitting with a very evidential medium in the UK who told her, by her mother who was in spirit, that we had to look out for the goats with the bells. Now, the very first day we got to Antequera, we arrived there after a sort of 250-mile trip, and we were quite hungry, looking for a restaurant. So we were a little bit early for the restaurants to open, but we passed one particular restaurant, and there was a chap there, although it wasn't open. An old guy, he sort of said to us, "Look, it's all right, I'll open, come in and have a meal." So we did so, and Sandra was sitting facing a window. I was sitting with my back to the window, and very shortly afterwards, as we were eating our meal, Sandra said, "My God, look." And as I turned around, coming down the hill towards the restaurant were hundreds of goats with bells on. And even then, we didn't realize that what Sandra's mother had told us was that this was the actual premises we needed to buy. Now, since then, we've had so many confirmations that, in fact, it is the right premises. Another medium friend of ours told us, you'll know you're in the right place when you see an eagle flying ahead. So overhead. And about 4 years ago, we've been going backwards and forwards to Antiquaria ever since. And about 4 years ago, we happened to pass this original restaurant. We'd not managed to find anywhere we thought would be suitable. But on passing this restaurant, we noticed that there was a banner across it saying it was up for sale. So again, the place was closed, but we went up to it and just thought, well, we'll have a little look. And as we got out of the car to go to the restaurant, we sort of parked it in the parking spaces in front. We looked up, and overhead, there's 2 golden eagles flying overhead. And there was absolutely no doubt then that this had to be the place. And we've had so many confirmations since. And we're desperately now sort of wanting to get enough funding together to buy it. And the ridiculous thing is, it's not a very expensive place. It's on 6.3 acres of land, which is quite amazing. And the building itself has a room on the ground floor, which was originally the restaurant. And this would hold 200 people, theatre style, which would be perfect for what we need. Plus, there's a small barn behind this building, which we could certainly very, very quickly turn into a custom-built seance room. And it's all sort of looking very good. It's just a question now of finding those people who can help us fund it. And going back to my sitting that I had with Sandy Ingham last June, she got directly from Spirit, try crowdfunding. And I did this, and at the same time, we started an organization called the Spiritual Science Foundation, which is there purely and simply really to sort of buy, convert, and run this wonderful center for physical mediumship in Andalusia. And the crowdfunding started. We've now got over 280 members of the Spiritual Science Foundation, and we're trying desperately hard to find new members. Very, very easy to join, and it only costs €20 a year. And once we're up and running, once we've got the place going, there will be, particularly for members of the foundation, very, very regular demonstrations of physical mediumship, both by our own residential group and by wonderful sort of genuine physical mediums, such as Kai Muger from Germany, who is actually our vice president. And that's the situation at the moment. So hopefully I've managed to sort of give you a little bit of detail.
Robin, are there any long-term goals that your team has shared with you, perhaps in connection with other physical circles throughout the world?
Most certainly. They are aiming. Our spirit team is aiming for connections with physical circles all over the world, and we want to welcome all of these physical circles into the foundation. Now, whilst we were at Scole, our spirit team there literally dictated a basic guide for any other physical circles who wanted to start using the energy format to use. This is actually still currently available to download from website www.scoleexperiment.com, and it's available to anybody that wants to download it for just €10. All of the money is going towards the foundation.
Thank you, Robin, for coming, and I love Sandy Ingham too. Best buds. You said the 4 sitters seem to work very well, and obviously harmony between the sitters. But
indeed,
is there any other best tips for those of us that are trying to develop?
The really, really good tips basically are all in this sort of basic guide. It's 72 pages, and you can download it from that website. Many people have done that, groups that have started, and many of those people who have downloaded it have actually got good phenomena going in their groups in the energy way.
why the experiment ended. That's always been something that was kind of driving me crazy.
Yeah, there's been too much speculation about it, Pam, I think. But in fact, it was a very, very easy reason, and there was absolutely nothing nasty about it at all. It was just to prevent information coming from the future, which we were not meant to have.
I know you said many people have downloaded how to do the energy method, but this is the first time I've ever heard that that was an option.
All right.
I'm wondering if it's just not well known that that's an option.
Well, that's probably quite true. And in fact, I mean, the more information I can give people about that, the better. And personally, I mean, I've had so much experience of physical mediumship and physical phenomena sitting with dozens of mediums over the last 45 years. And I've gathered so much information and so much knowledge. And all I want to do now, basically, as an ambassador for spirit, if you like, is to pass on that information. So that's another one of the reasons that we want to open this center. And anybody who is a member of the Spiritual Science Foundation can come on to me anytime, sort of through emails or what have you, and get information advice as far as I can give it.
Hi, Robin.
Hi.
A couple of questions. One of them is that we have Zoom groups, 2 Zoom groups for physical mediumship. One of them is for emergent circles, and we are trying to get people together so they can network and learn from experts like you.
Yeah.
And another that Susan is running, and they've been talking about art in connection with physical mediumship. So we'd like to somehow get you involved in those. Wendy is the one who's spearheading all of this, and with Karen's help. And so we'll have to talk with you more about it. And my second question is the Edison device. I sent you an email one time asking you about that. We would really like to replicate that and see if we can do anything with getting any contacts. Is there some way that we can replicate that device or
well, I have a sort of blueprint of the device that I can sort of send you by email.
Good.
Which will give you an idea on the thing. That's not a problem at all.
Yeah.
But then, you've got to have the spirit team that will work with you to get it working. And it did, as far as we were concerned at Scole, it took months. But when they got it going, Edison himself spoke to us for 15 minutes.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Yes, we would like to have that, and I'd like to give it a try. Because we do have, there is what we're terming now the North American station that we're connecting with. And we're wondering whether they might be able to come through on it. They are endeavoring with great vitality to bridge the gap between our world and theirs. And so hopefully they'd be able to do that. We'd like to do that, like to give it a try. And you can then advise us about it as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always pleased to do that. And I mean, I know that you're a member of our foundation, and founder member, thank you very much. Sort of, I'm always happy. Anybody in the foundation, sort of wants to get advice, I'm always happy to give it for free.
Good. Okay.
Hi, Susan. Yeah.
Hi, Robin. I just wanted to say that I'm actually reading your basic book right now on how to run a circle.
Right.
And with all the research I've been doing on physical mediumship, it is probably the best and the most inclusive piece of literature that I've seen on the subject. So I would highly recommend people for downloading, to download it, because it really is helpful. I mean, you cover everything.
That thing was literally dictated. So our spirit team are the ones to thank for that, because they were the ones that actually wrote it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's wonderful.
And it works.
Wonderful. Oh, yeah. And the thing that really amazed me about it is that there's just little things, you got into little things like electrical appliances in a room, and the fact noise and the single door and all of that. And I would also say to people that if you can't follow it 100%, there's something in that that's going to help you with your individual seance room. Yeah.
Curious if the team has given you any clue about the hybrid circles. I don't think we're the only circle that is using both ectoplasm and energy. Do you know anything about that, Robin?
Yes, I mean, I've come to the conclusion myself a long time ago that that's really what's happened since Scole. And I look at circles like Kai Muga's, and Kai is probably the best known ectoplasmic demonstrating physical medium at the moment. But I have a feeling myself, because when Kai first started to develop, he developed through energy phenomena, and he was getting good energy phenomena before he added the ectoplasm bit in there. And what I also like about Kai's group now is that, like our own group, many of the helpers, many of the spirit team are scientists. And basically, that means that, you're getting an awful lot of exploration and research done within the group. And I think probably Kai himself is working with a group that's partly ectoplasm, partly energy. And I think the reason for that, in his case, is so that it's not as dangerous as it used to be with ectoplasm alone.
Wonderful. And what can you tell us about the organization of the teams on the other side that you work with? Other than them being made up of specialists, seems like we hear this. There's specialists that are working over there. But can
they
you tell
are
us?
Indeed, and at this point in time, unfortunately, I can't give you too much information on them because they have a specific purpose for our own group and what they want us to actually do. That they won't allow people to know until they start to apply it. But our own team is made up of many of the people that were with us at Scole. Not all of them are using the same name as they used at Scole. But the scientists, for instance, we do have a couple of Williams there. There's William Crooks and there's William Barrett that are working with us in that, and several others that specialize in different things. Plus, and I will tell you this much, there is very much a leaning within the spirit team to people who were part of the Civil War in America.
I think one of the first books that I read was the Scole Experiment, and was absolutely fascinating to me. And when it finally got to that film canister, that just took me right over the top. So fabulous work.
There is in fact a major big screen movie planned about Scole at the moment, and in fact it's got as far as it's actually being sort of written as a screenplay by the two people that wrote that book, The Scole Experiment. And as far as I know, the actual screenplay itself has now been finished and is being passed around to major film companies in the UK, in the USA rather.
Oh, fabulous.
Robin, I'm very curious about the interdimensionals. I've read the book, Witnessing the Impossible, and we got, there's some wonderful information. I highly recommend that book to anybody who wants to learn about Scole. But what can you tell us about the interdimensionals and how they're different from people that have passed in spirit and how they interacted with you?
Well, basically, it started probably about a year before Scole finished. And we had a mini UFO was actually created in the room and flew around the room. And we commented on that, more or less. And at that time, there were just Sandra and I that were awake in the room because the two mediums were sort of out flat. But this miniature UFO sort of was quite tiny, but I mean, it was fully shaped like a UFO, like a mothership type of thing, with portholes that were lit up. And when we commented on it, the spirit team said, "Well, sort of, are you worried about this?" And we said, "No, we're not. We're quite open to anything." And if we had said that we weren't happy with it, it wouldn't have happened. But that was the first sign, and then gradually we had on our film, because we had a video recorder that sort of worked totally in darkness, and this video recorder captured pictures of animated spirit beings that weren't from spirit, and one of these was the being we knew as Blue, and we called him Blue because that was his color. And I mean, it came through on the video recorder. The color was quite. I mean, I think in my book it was, unfortunately, it was black and white, but it was blue in the original photograph, and it was totally animated. And I still occasionally use sort of the blue clip, you know, sort of just to pass on to people to show them exactly what he was like. But I mean, he was very much like the Greys of ufology, except that he was blue in color. And after we'd had the miniature UFO, and after we captured his picture, or he'd left his picture, shall I say, on the video recorder, then he actually was teleported into the room. And he was quite solid. He stood in front of me and in front of Sandra. And when he did that, both of us could feel that from him, there was physical love that came like a wall, and it was the most fantastic thing. And this guy, I mean, I would have judged him to be about 4'3", 4'6" in tall. And he picked up our hands and he put them on his head so that we could feel that he was not human. And he allowed us really to sort of feel his face totally. And it was a fantastic experience. I mean, he had very, very short hair. I think the expression that we probably would have used was bumfluff. Very, very short hair. But he was such a lovely personality, and we could just feel this love coming from him. And then we were able to later stage to speak to him and to other beings through the TDC device. But he hasn't left us. And when the two physical mediums came from Glasgow to stay with us here in Spain, and that, as I say, now is 10 years ago, 10 years, 11 years, yeah, 11 years. He actually, once again, was teleported into the room on 2 occasions, and once in France when we shared the gîte with him there. And we've been having more and more information that leads us to believe that he'll be back with us shortly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for taking this question, Robin. Within the mediumship of Arnold Clare's physical mediumship, it's stated in one of his books that he used obviously the earth energies, and there were fairies that were actually seen within the seance room that were producing that were required to produce the basic earth energy. I'd like to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, in our work, the earth energy is a very, very important part because it's the earth energies that are in geographical columns in different places. But if you're starting a group, that column will be attracted to you. And that's one of the 3 ingredients of the creative energy, which the spirit team will mix together and then use to create the phenomena. So there are the 3 different types of energy that include the basic earth energy, which are mixed together to create the phenomena. Of course, Arnold Clare worked with Harry Edwards. Harry Edwards was his mentor. And we also have a sign that Harry Edwards is around at the moment with work we're doing.
It was very enlightening, as usual. We would expect that of you. And we look forward to having more dialogues like this in the future and have you involved in what we're doing. And we certainly will
hope so. And I hope that at some point, you know, you might be able to help us out in many ways with the foundation when it really gets going.
Yeah, we would very much like to do that. So thank you very much. And thank everybody else for coming and for being part of this exposition. And we look forward to the next one that we're going to be having. And we'll have to have Robin back again sometime.